Today we've got a great revenge story that ends up with somebody stealing another person's door. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, former manager ends my job at the company I loved. I helped end his career in local tech forever. This is my first one of these. I hope it qualifies. I apologize for this being so long, but I've had to keep this story to myself for more than a decade. Ironically, a recent court ruling means I'm now free to discuss the details publicly for the first time without penalty. I'm starting with here. First, the background. I worked at a very big tech company for a very long time, like decades. Over the years, I had worked my way up from being a noob to a kind of specialist fixer. I became fairly well known internally as a security/emergency response person. I got assigned the bad or unfixable projects, many of which made news headlines. I have many stories that I can never tell publicly, sadly. Suffice it to say that multiple senior vice presidents in various divisions got to know who I was because I effectively wrangled gnarly and complex problems and herded many intense tech nerds together to resolve things in multiple divisions over the years. It was so fun. At the time of our story, I was working on a small security team in a product engineering division. It was a somewhat turbulent time, and our team of 8 had weathered multiple reorganizations and had so many manager changes. It was a lot, but we kept our heads down and did the work, and we all got along just fine. Sidebar, and relevant later, one of the better managers assigned to run our team immediately assigned me a huge and complicated and urgently important project to manage. It would involve people in 6 different divisions, had seriously big legal implications, and our senior VP wanted it to happen by an aggressive deadline within like 4 to 6 weeks. Oh, and my manager was leaving imminently on a long-planned vacation, so he apologetically would be away for the next 3 weeks and unable to assist. The project was to do something big and technical and which had never been done before, so no one was entirely sure how to do it, who all it would require, what steps in what order. Some of the key players had what we gently called difficult personalities. And oh, by the way, it would definitely make international news and cause a ripple in the industry when we did it. No big whoop. Manager was a decent guy and he felt bad about leaving me with this thorny mess. And I did it. We got all the people from all the divisions in a room and mapped it all out on a whiteboard. It took days and hashed out how to do it before the deadline. Actually, well before for bonus points. And we lined everyone up to get it done. Before we pulled the actual trigger on the very big thing, I had to attend a meeting with the VP and executive leadership, several levels of management above me, and with the legal team to present the plan and to assure all of the execs that we were ready and had it all handled. So I looked the VP in the eye and assured him that I got this. And then I did. The team did the big thing sooner than the deadline. It was flawless. We rocked that. Just another day at the office? 2. The inept manager. A few months after that epic project, our good manager left us for another role and someone new moved over from an unrelated division out of nowhere. We'll call him inept manager. Inept manager did not know anything about security. He did not know anything about emergency response. He didn't know anything about what our division did. In fact, no one on our team had ever heard of this guy. He was that worst kind of middle manager, self-important, dismissive of everyone, cares most about appearances and ego, micromanages stuff he doesn't comprehend, and just makes everything worse. But he apparently knows people, and those people get him job assignments because of politics? Loyalty? He certainly didn't have any skills or experience for our team. That guy is the worst. One of inept manager's many weird quirks was that he didn't think it was appropriate for our team to disagree with or correct each other in front of other people. Things in tech, specifically product development, move pretty quickly, and things change all the time. So if some of our team was meeting with someone from another team and something like, "So we decided to make the sky green and we're on schedule," and someone else on our team chimed in to say, "Actually, that's changed. We decided that the sky is now going to be blue and we pushed the deadline back 2 weeks. That just happened in an earlier meeting." Replying, "Oh, okay, cool," inept manager would then interrupt and say, "We clearly need to get on the same page. Let's end this meeting right now and reschedule when my team has all the facts straight." What? That's insane. We would literally never have any meetings if we waited until everyone knew all of the same information all the time. Other teams would routinely leave meetings with us with inaccurate info, which affected release schedules, resources. It was just a mess. 3. Inept manager hostility. Shortly after Inept manager became our manager, he started being really hostile to me. Not to everyone on the team, just me. As far as I knew, I hadn't done or said anything to earn his hostility. Suddenly, after 20 plus years at this company, I could do nothing right. While this jerk didn't actually understand most of what my job was, he was sure I wasn't doing it right, and he was quick to tell me so, and often in front of others, to the point that my coworkers would take me aside to ask what the freak was going on. I didn't know either. The thing is, I was the only woman on the team, and I have a disability. Now, I've been through some things working in high tech over those decades. It was very much of an old boys club back then, and I was fine. I'm not one to claim discrimination at the drop of a hat or for no reason. However, when I was trying to piece together the cause of this dude's hostility, some of his comments were sexist and not at all subtle. He also didn't like that due to my disability and, frankly, my seniority, I was given one of the few offices with a door on it in our new building. The rest of our team were in open floor plan cubicles, which everyone hated. He was incensed that I, a lowly direct report and woman, got an office and he didn't. I had more seniority than just about anyone, so even without my disability, I'd have scored the office ahead of him. Note that other men in our division got offices too, because again, seniority, and that bothered him less. But I was the only woman on our floor with a door, and I was his subordinate. His ego did not like it, not one bit. He threw a fit about it repeatedly. There were lots of other things he said. My favorite among them towards the end was him reprimanding me for my bad attitude in a meeting we just had. Inept manager had told me beforehand not to say anything during that meeting because he was insisting on sharing incorrect information again, and he knew I'd want to correct it, so I sat quietly and kept my eyes on the PowerPoint presentation or the floor nearly the whole time. When I asked him how I'd had a bad attitude when I hadn't said anything, as he requested, "I didn't like the look on your face." Okay, dude. After realizing there was nothing I could do to make this guy happy with my work and to lose his hostility, I finally went to HR to go on the record. I knew that they would do freak all about it, but I wanted to document it at least. So predictably, they told me to work harder at getting along with Inept manager. And because it wasn't my first rodeo, I went back to my office and emailed HR saying, "Thanks for meeting with me about my concerns about Inept manager. I fear his bias and misogyny will reflect negatively in my next performance review. HR should be aware that there is a real problem here, and I hope you'll take steps, etc., which of course they didn't. But now it was on the record. 4. The axe falls. And then a few months later, he gave me a terrible performance review, as expected. Long story already long, he was trying to fire me for underperformance. Unfortunately for me, the company had started rounds of layoffs all over, and it was the worst possible time to be looking for another job internally. And now I had a bad performance review on my record too. I went back to HR and said, "That thing I said I was worried it would happen when we met 6 months ago? That happened, exactly as I said. Now what?" HR, once again, was no help. Also, they had done literally nothing. But hey, it was on the record. Again, helpful for the attorney later. Blah 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 when I realized I couldn't find a new gig at my company because of all the layoffs. Sigh. I scored a new job for much more money at a different local tech company. And pretty quickly. I live in a tech-heavy area. There was lots of shuffling between 3 to 4 big companies during this time period, and we'd often bump into other company veterans at these other companies. It was a small world. With my track record and references, it was super easy. After that was lined up, I called an employment discrimination attorney to negotiate my exit from the company I thought I'd work at until I retired. Sad face. Because I had documentation with HR explaining Inept manager's misogyny and ableism going back for some time, and because they'd done freak all about it, and because there were witnesses who confirmed his behavior, they had no leg to stand on. They agreed to write me a relatively nice check to go away and to not sue them, and I agreed to not talk about the details of my separation agreement. I went down to my lawyer's office and signed the agreement. I looked to see who had signed the agreement for the company. I assumed it would be someone in HR. but it was still blank. I would eventually get a copy once someone there signed it. I took my check and packed up my office and left. Bye, old company. I started my new job a few weeks later. 5. Karma begins. This was August of that year that I left. I got my copy of the executed contract in the mail in October. Who signed it for the company? Not HR, but my exec VP, the one who asked for the urgent, highly important, legally complicated project. The guy I looked in the eye personally and then delivered on this very big thing, TM, he personally asked for, before the deadline he asked for. That is who signed off on my separation agreement. I suspect that he had no idea until that moment that I was gone, and I imagine that he had likely many questions about what had happened. And also, why did they have to pay me a chunk of money on the way out? Whoops. I chortled when I saw it. Since the VP knew me and we had some history and inept manager was new to the division and was one of hundreds of middle managers he'd likely never heard of, I'm guessing inept manager had some explaining to do. I really enjoyed the thought of that. 6. Karma for reals. Cut to November. As I mentioned, it was a relatively small tech community in the area. And those of us who worked in security, in particular at Company X, would often encounter other current or former colleagues at Company Y or Z or whatever. Heck, there was a ton of poaching going on between the companies. One day, I got an in-company chat from someone who had worked in security at my old company. We'll call her Security Colleague. Security Colleague asked me if I knew someone named Inept Manager. Why yes. Yes, I did. Why? Because Inept Manager was appearing on Security Colleague's schedule to interview for an open management position the very next day. It seems that shortly after my former exec VP had signed my separation agreement contract, Inept Manager was actively looking for a new job at a new company. Security Colleague asked me what I thought about Inept Manager. I said, I can't really talk about it for legal reasons. Which, boom, everyone knows what that means. But if you want to ring my personal cell phone later this evening to catch up on old times, please do. She did. I hypothetically shared some stories with her about Inept Manager. I also told her where his hot buttons are, the appearance and ego thing, the dominant stuff, etc., and all about his misogyny and ableism, which was perfect since she was conducting his interview. I may have shared some specific scenarios or questions to ask, which I knew would set him off. I wished her luck, and for the love of all that is holy, to please call me after, when appropriate, and tell me how it all went. It did not go well for Inept Manager. When Security Colleague rang me, I couldn't wait. How did it go? Well, he got combative and angry and yelled at me twice during his interview to be hired as manager. Facepalm. There were lots more details, now lost to time, except at that company, interviews loops were assessed as such. Strong hire for this role. Hire, but not for this role. Not a good fit for this job, but we like them. No hire ever, not for any role. Inept Manager's interview was rated that last one, no hire ever, blacklisted from any job ever at one of the biggest tech companies in the world. After being pushed out of the door of one of the other biggest tech companies in the world, derp. Shortly after that, it appears that Inept Manager moved himself and his wife and kids a few states away to work at a smaller company in another region. It took less than 6 months from when I left my old company for him to be gone as well. What gets me, still, is that Inept Manager thought I was so inconsequential, so unimportant, that he didn't bother to check and see where I landed after he forced me out of the company I loved. And when he had to look for a job himself shortly thereafter, it also never occurred to him that I'd have connections with, thousands of colleagues I'd worked with over the years, some of whom could now be working at Company X or Y or Z where he was interviewing and where I'd scored a huge raise for myself. To this day, he doesn't know why his interview at Company Y tanked so badly. And since Security Colleague was not legally precluded from sharing stories she had heard through the grapevine about Inept Manager's management problems, it's possible that either of our old security colleagues at Company Z and other companies in this area heard those stories too, which means he's unlikely to get a job at any major tech company in this area. maybe ever. Definitely not at X or Y, and they are big companies, among the biggest. And it's all because he's a jerk, ableist, misogynist middle manager who underestimated lil old me. Mwahaha. Besides the obvious misogynist and terrible person stuff, I think it clearly starts and ends with him being a full-blown narcissist. Clearly, this dude thought so highly of himself that he deserved everything in the world, so it's no shock that A, they clearly thought they did no wrong, so they're not going to predict anything going wrong at this other company, and B, that they would think, oh, I aced that interview, they would be stupid not to invite me for some crazy high-level management position. I guess now that he moved to a different state, he's going to be able to fool some other people for a while. Harry WWC commented, "To this day, he doesn't know why his interview at Company Y tanked so badly." Indeed, I think from reading your tale that he would be so self-unaware that he would believe that his interview was absolutely golden and that there was absolutely no possible way he would have done anything wrong. So it must be that insert crude comment of an interviewer that was at fault. Our next story is, I grew up only girl with 7 teenage boys. So I lived in a 2-story family house in my early teens. We lived downstairs, my mom, my stepdad, and 3 older brothers. Upstairs was 2 parents with 4 boys too, so there was a lot of testosterone in the air, to be frank. So we lived with sharing rooms. The boys shared 2 rooms. I was stuck in the middle with a very, very small space, 5 or 6 kVm. While their rooms looked and smelled awful, I made sure to keep my small personal space very neat and tidy. I also invested in a full TV setup with quite a large TV, mid to late 90s. I found out that if I was away, my brothers would use my room to be disgusting in, as if the rest of the house wasn't enough. They would use my bed, my TV, and VHS and just lay there choking the chickens, sweating and smoking and scratching their balls and stuff. So one day I found out that they would also use my room to bring a girl once in a while. Flash forward to me on my knees making my bed with a thin spreadsheet of about 250 flat-headed push pins under it, covering the entire 90 by 200 mattress, and then I left for school. Later the next day, I got a call from my mom. She had a very hard time trying not to laugh too much while telling me that my one brother had been working hard to get with this girl from school. She knew he was a freak boy but gave him a shot. The shot was in my room on my bed, on a needle mattress. No human was harmed, but no one ever used my room after that. My brother says 25 years later, he still checks his chairs, etc., just to make sure there's no needles. Landing on a bunch of push pins? Hey, I think I saw that on a WWE show once. They must have been wrestling, right? Hit him with the RKO right onto the thumbtacks? That's what was going on, right? Miniver commented, "Love this, but I have questions. Did mom know that they were using your room like that? And if so, why in the heck did she let them?" OP responded saying, "Both my mom and my stepdad worked a lot to keep the household together with 4 kids. My dad, he's just my dad really, worked mornings and my mom worked evenings. So they didn't always see all that was happening, and I often had sleepovers at my friends' houses, a bit more quiet there. My parents did say often for them to leave my room alone, but as all teenagers, they just did what they wanted, not worried about consequences, I guess." Our next story is Breakup Satisfaction. My ex and I were together for 6 years, engaged for 3 months, and then he broke up with me. I remember crying in disbelief. He looked at me and said, "Look at you. No wonder nobody likes you. No wonder you have no friends." Those words were ringing in my head when my friends and I went back to the apartment to pack my stuff up. Aside from nearly everything being mine, from the silverware to the shower curtain, I really wanted to mess with him. He was a bit of a clothes horse, so I went through his closet and all his favorite shirts. I took a razor blade and frayed the thread on the 3rd or 4th button down, enough that it would hang on for a wash or 2, then pop off. His blue jeans got the same treatment. A seam here, a button there, the crotch frayed to split the next time he bent over. I doubt he ever figured out that it was me, but my girlfriends and I still laugh about it. P.S. That breakup was the best thing that ever happened to me. I've been happily married going on 15 years now with a great kid. Thanks, V. As soon as OP said they got the razor out, I was like, oh, they're just gonna go and destroy all of his clothes or cut them all up or, I don't know, cut circle holes right in the chest area of all of his shirts or something. But I gotta give OP credit, they went about it much more cleverly than I could have guessed. I mean, this guy just thinks all his favorite clothes are just constantly failing on him. I almost wonder in some way if OP's revenge can affect his love for the brands he bought those clothes from. Because imagine you have like multiple things from the same place. Because when you bend over, your jeans split, the buttons are popping off, all of a sudden this thing won't stay together. I would begin thinking, man, they're making this stuff out of cheap material. Holmes02 commented, imagine him trying to crawl back to you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean all that I said. Please take me back. I'm afraid not. Our next story is, block my friend's view, I'll block access to your sweater. This literally happened last week at a large European festival. Right before the main headliner of the night was playing, a thunderstorm erupted and rain began pouring down. As we were quite keen to see this music act, my friend and I took shelter under a tent entrance, with my friend right at the front of the entrance as she is very petite. A drunk couple using a fully red and not see-through waterproof draped over the both of them came staggering over and stood right in front of my mate, completely blocking her view. We both politely asked them to move as they had a waterproof and could stand anywhere without getting wet, but we were not only ignored, but they openly kept raising their arms even higher to prevent any kind of view. We were both quite frustrated at this turn of events, considering this music act was one of the reasons we'd come to the festival in the first place. And instead of watching it, we got to see the couple drunkenly either having a makeout session or arguing in their language. All of a sudden, the woman walked away from her partner and threw his sweater at him. The sweater fell to the floor, but the man was too drunk to notice and just swayed in his spot. In a moment of utter pettiness, I quickly reached down and grabbed his sweater, pushing it behind me into a puddle. He didn't notice at all and staggered off after his partner. I do hope he didn't get too cold after that storm, but we definitely enjoyed the rest of the set much more after that. It's not quite the same thing, but it kind of reminds me of the conversation people have about how you buy concert tickets and you buy a seat ticket. And specifically the question of, if you buy a ticket that's in the seated section, is it okay to stand for almost the whole time? The argument becomes you're in the seated section, but you standing can block the view of the people behind you. Knowing my luck though, I would get stuck behind the person with the giant billboard sign the whole show. You Can't Take the Sky From Me commented, this reminds me of when I took my parents to see Lion King on Broadway. That auditorium has pretty cramped seats, and we were seated in the row behind a very large individual. He draped his winter coat over the back of his chair, so it basically took up half of the space in the seat behind him, where my mom was sitting. I looked up and down the row, and as is courteous, everyone else had their coats on their lap and not done what he had done. So I asked him to move his coat so my mom could enjoy the space she paid for. He was dismissive and ignored me, so because his winter coat draped all the way to the floor throughout the show, I repeatedly stepped on it with my boots covered in all the wonderful muck a slushy New York had to offer. He did notice this and tried to get into it with me, and I told him to eat rocks because I didn't have anywhere else to put my feet. Our next story is weird lawn patterns. So my neighbors are mad at me, most likely because I called the cops on them while they were having a screaming argument that I could hear through the shared wall. In my defense, I'd heard them read that as at least once a week, times before, and I'd never done anything. But this time I heard one of them scream, "Somebody call 911!" So I did. They've been quiet since. Now to the revenge. Our houses share a wall and a strip of lawn between us. It's not very wide, so whenever one of us is mowing the grass, normally we just mow the whole strip, since it only takes about 10 minutes. Since the whole cop calling debacle, they've only mowed their half of the strip, which, fine, whatever, if they want to be petty, I can be pettier. After all, I put up with their screaming matches for a long time, so if they mow vertical, I go horizontal or vice versa. The resulting mismatch of patterns in the grass is quite bizarre to look at. It's extremely petty because I know the neighbors like everything to look nice and neat, and I know that the mismatched lawn stripes drive them crazy. Honestly, I say the fact that the mismatched lawn stripes driving them crazy is exactly the kind of reason why they're the kind of people who freak out and have these kinds of uptight, crazy arguments where they yell, "Call 911." It sounds to me like they need to let go a little bit of that stranglehold they have over every detail in their life. Lilac Slumber commented, lived in a duplex for a few years next to a couple of hippie boomers. Their daughter, 2 grandkids, and kid's dad moved in with them. They brought a dog. The dog would crap on our side of the lawn all the time. Once, he must have not been able to make it to our side and pooped on the grass in between. Think 3 feet wide by about 8 feet long on their side. Before this, whichever of us mowed would always do the in-between part because it would take literally less than 2 minutes to do. But this time, I didn't mow their half because it was pretty fresh dog crap, and I didn't want it in my mower or sprayed all over me in the sidewalk. Cut to 2 days later and I was heading out the front door. I hear Grandma yell at the kids coming out of the car. "Watch out here, be sure to stay on the sidewalk and don't walk in the dog crap. I don't want it in my house." That's when I walk out of the door and she stops and yells at me, "I saw you mowing and you couldn't even take 2 seconds to do this part? Why wouldn't you mow our side? We always mow your side." I said, "You just said you don't want dog crap in your house, right?" "Well, I don't want it on my mower or all over my sidewalk. I already have to deal with all the dog crap in my yard. I'm not going to pick up what's in your yard too. I'd be happy to mow your side if you clean up after your dog." All she said was, "I didn't know you heard me say that," and shut the door before her daughter or grandkids were in the house. This next story is Secret Petty Revenge Against Aunty. Without going into too much detail, there's an auntie in my family who I despise. To keep the peace, we still send her birthday and Christmas cards, but she's the only aunt who gets to be named Aunty, not with the IE spelling when addressed in writing. Why? Because AUNTY is only a single letter off the word spelt with a C instead. And yes, we're always on the lookout for those special aunty cards where it's printed in fancy cursive and actually looks like that word. She hasn't cottoned on yet and thinks she's special because all the other aunts are addressed in writing with IE, and she's the only one that gets the special spelling. She may never find out, but I don't mind. This is purely for myself, and I smile every time I write her a card. Honestly, sometimes this is the best way to get revenge. Something that is so calm on the surface that literally only you probably may ever realize or figure out, but it does give you that little dopamine hit of the revenge you do need without really causing some catastrophic thing to happen. Floobity-doo commented, "I was very much filled with rage against my narcissistic mother while I was in my 20s and 30s, especially when giving her gifts and cards. If she knew I had picked something out, she'd hate it. My sister picked it out? Love. My petty revenge, I signed every card with affectation. My handwriting is naturally horrible, but I know she probably never read my cards. But I knew, and it pleased me." Our next story is Steal My Stuff, I'll Steal Your Door. A friend of mine had issues with one of his neighbors. They were noisy, continuously drunk or stoned, believed they were untouchable, stole really minor things like potted plants, bins, benches, garden furniture, basically anything that was easily moved and not screwed down. After many times of lifting the fence panels up and taking back the items that they took, he got annoyed with the balls on them and the lack of any real police response. Middle of the summer, they had a habit of having parties. Loud music till all hours and generally scum roaming around the local area causing trouble. My mate had nipped home during his break and noticed that the front door was open and one of the parties was going on in the rear of the house. At that time, he worked as a day laborer for Independent Carpenter. A plan was hatched. They opened the rear doors of their plain white van, he ran over with an impact driver, and proceeded to remove the screws from the hinges and steal the door and throw it in the van and drive off. Plan accomplished, they dumped the door in an on-site skip. When he returned that evening, the door was still missing, was replaced the next morning with a pallet with a mattress stuck behind it. Eventually, someone probably stole a piece of chipboard and that was screwed in place. It almost sounds like OP was invited to a weird neighborly competition that OP ultimately won. Let's see how weird of an item you can steal from each other and get away with it. I'll start with your lawn gnome and potted plant. By the way, where did my front door go? Survivor 0000 commented, "For many years I've told a joke. I went to the council and said, I've come about my front door. They say, what about it? I say, I want one. I never thought my joke would come true." But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.